The thunder cracked so loud, it sounded like the heavens themselves were splitting apart, and that was when Joshua Wright first saw her stumbling through the rain outside his cabin, her dress torn and muddy, her dark hair plastered to her face like seaweed on a drowning woman. He had been sitting by the fire in his small ranch house, 3 miles outside of Lead, South Dakota, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the storm roll in across the Black Hills when the lightning illuminated her figure. Joshua jumped to his feet so fast his chair toppled backward, and he was out the door before his mind could catch up with his body. The rain hit him like 1,000 cold needles, instantly soaking through his cotton shirt. The woman had collapsed in his yard, her body crumpled in the mud like a discarded puppet. Joshua ran to her, his boots splashing through puddles that had formed in mere minutes. When he reached her, he knelt down and gently turned her over. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with delicate features now pale with exhaustion and cold. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing irises the color of warm honey, before closing again. "I have got you," Joshua said, though he doubted she could hear him over the roar of the storm. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she felt, and carried her back toward the cabin. The wind fought him every step, trying to push him sideways, but Joshua had spent his 26 years in these hills and knew how to stand firm against nature's fury. Inside, he kicked the door shut behind them and carried her straight to his bed, the only real furniture in the small cabin besides the table, 2 chairs, and a crude dresser he had built himself. He laid her down gently on the quilt his mother had made before she died, then hurried to stoke the fire higher. The cabin was just one large room with a sleeping area curtained off in the corner, but it was solid and warm, built with his own 2 hands over the course of 2 summers. Joshua grabbed every blanket he owned and piled them on top of the woman, then filled a pot with water from the pump by the sink and set it on the stove to heat. Her clothes were soaked through, and he knew he needed to get her dry, but propriety held him back. Instead, he pulled off her muddy boots and stockings, trying not to notice how small her feet were, how delicate her ankles. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, but she remained unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. He wrung out a cloth in the warming water and gently cleaned the mud from her face and hands. In the firelight, he could see she was beautiful in a way that made his chest tighten. Her features were refined, aristocratic even, and her dress, though ruined now, had clearly been expensive once. What was a woman like this doing out in the middle of nowhere during a storm that would keep even the most desperate souls indoors? Joshua spent the next hour tending to her, changing the water, keeping the fire fed, and watching her face for signs of waking. The storm raged outside, rattling the shutters and making the whole cabin creak. He had weathered worse in the 3 years since he had staked his claim to this piece of land, but tonight the storm felt different, charged with something he could not name. It was near midnight when her eyes finally opened fully. She looked around in confusion, her gaze darting from the rough log walls to the fire to finally landing on Joshua, who sat in a chair he had pulled up beside the bed. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "My cabin about 3 miles outside Lead. I found you collapsed in my yard during the storm. What is your name?" She tried to sit up but fell back against the pillows with a soft gasp. Delilah Norris. "I am Joshua Wright. You are safe here, Miss Norris." "But I have got to ask, what were you doing out in that storm?" Delilah's eyes filled with tears that spilled down her cheeks. "I was running. I had to get away." "From what?" She turned her face away from him. "Please, I cannot talk about it right now. I am so tired." Joshua nodded, standing up. "All right, you rest. We can talk in the morning. I will be right over there by the fire if you need anything." "Wait," she said, reaching out to catch his hand. Her fingers were cold and delicate in his rough, calloused palm. "Thank you for helping me. You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said softly. "Not everyone. Not anymore." Joshua did not know what to say to that, so he just squeezed her hand gently before pulling away. He settled into his chair by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, and tried to sleep. But every few minutes, he found himself looking over at the woman in his bed, wondering what circumstances had brought her to his door. The storm continued through the night, and Joshua dozed fitfully, waking at every crack of thunder to check that Delilah was still breathing, still sleeping peacefully. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, the rain finally began to ease, and by 5, it had stopped entirely. Joshua got up to put coffee on and was surprised to hear Delilah's voice behind him. "Is that coffee I smell?" He turned to find her sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. Her hair had dried into wild waves around her shoulders, and she had somehow managed to look dignified despite everything. "It is. How are you feeling?" "Like I was trampled by a herd of cattle, but alive, better than I might have been." Joshua poured 2 cups and brought one to her, then dragged his chair back over. The first light of dawn was beginning to seep through the cracks in the shutters, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. "I suppose you want to know my story," Delilah said, wrapping her hands around the tin cup. "Only if you want to tell it." She took a sip of the coffee and winced at its strength, but took another sip anyway. "I came to Dakota Territory 3 months ago with my father. He had heard about the gold in the Black Hills and was convinced he could make our fortune. We had lost everything back in Philadelphia after his business failed. This was supposed to be our new beginning." "Where is your father now?" Delilah's hands tightened around the cup. "He died 2 weeks ago, cave-in at one of the mines." They brought his body back to our boarding house in Lead, and suddenly I was alone with no money, no prospects, and the landlady telling me I had 3 days to pay the rent or get out. "That is terrible. I am sorry about your father." "Thank you." She took another sip of coffee. "I tried to find work, but Lead is not exactly full of opportunities for women. The only jobs offered to me were in the saloons, and they made it very clear what kind of work that would entail. I refused, and then yesterday the landlady came with a man. His name was Vernon Pike, and he owned half the gambling dens in town. The landlady had sold him my debt, and he said I would work for him now, one way or another." Joshua felt anger coil in his chest. He knew men like Vernon Pike, had seen their type in every mining town he had ever passed through. "So you ran?" "I waited until they left the room, then I climbed out the window and started running. I had no plan, no destination. I just knew I had to get away from that place, from that man. I walked for hours in the heat, got lost in the hills, and then the storm came. I thought I was going to die out there." She looked up at him, and in the growing dawn light he could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. "And then I saw your cabin." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the drip of water from the eaves outside. Joshua tried to process everything she had told him. It was a familiar story in too many ways. The Black Hills gold rush had brought thousands of people flooding into Dakota Territory starting in 1875. And now, in this year of 1878, Lead was bursting with prospectors, businessmen, criminals, and people just trying to survive. The gold had made some men rich, but it had destroyed just as many, leaving behind widows, orphans, and desperate souls. "What will you do now?" Joshua asked finally. Delilah looked down at her hands. "I do not know. I suppose I should try to get to another town, find some kind of work. Maybe Deadwood or Rapid City. Pike has connections everywhere in the Black Hills. If he wants to find you, he will." Then what do you suggest? There was an edge of desperation in her voice now. Joshua surprised himself with his next words. Stay here. At least for a few days while you recover and figure out your next move. I could use help around the place, and you would be safe. Pike does not know about me, and no one comes out this way except the occasional rider passing through. Delilah stared at him. Why would you do that for me? You do not even know me. Because it is the right thing to do, and because no one should have to face what you are facing alone. She set down her coffee cup, and Joshua saw her hands were trembling. You are either the kindest man I have ever met or a fool. Probably a bit of both, Joshua admitted with a small smile. But the offer stands. All right, Delilah said after a long moment. For a few days, until I can figure out what to do next, but I will work, I will not be a burden. Fair enough. Now you should eat something. You look like you have not had a proper meal in days. He was not wrong. When Joshua cooked up some bacon and eggs with the last of his bread, Delilah ate like she was starving, which she probably was. Watching her, Joshua felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in years. Not since Sarah had broken their engagement to marry the banker's son in town. That had been 4 years ago, and Joshua had thought himself well and truly cured of any tender feelings. Apparently, he had been wrong. After breakfast, Joshua showed Delilah around the small property. He had built the cabin on a nice piece of land with a creek running through it and good grazing for the dozen head of cattle he was trying to build into a herd. It was not much, but it was his, and he was proud of it. It is beautiful here, Delilah said, looking out at the hills. The storm had cleared the air and everything sparkled in the morning sun. Peaceful. It is that. Gets lonely sometimes, but mostly it is peaceful. How long have you lived here? 3 years. Came out here after my parents died. They had a small farm in Nebraska, but there was nothing keeping me there anymore, so I decided to head west and try my luck. Not with gold, but with land and cattle. Something real and lasting. You built all this yourself, with help from some neighbors when it came time to raise the walls. But mostly, yes. Delilah turned to look at him, and there was admiration in her eyes that made Joshua feel about 10 feet tall. That is remarkable. They spent the rest of the morning working together. Joshua had been planning to mend the fence on the north pasture, and Delilah insisted on helping despite still being weak from her ordeal. She was not used to manual labor, that much was obvious, but she did not complain, even when her hands started to blister. You should rest, Joshua told her around midday. You are going to hurt yourself. I told you I would work for my keep, Delilah said stubbornly, hammering another nail into the fence post with more force than necessary. You nearly died last night. No one expects you to start hauling lumber the next day. I expect it of myself. Joshua studied her determined face and realized she needed this, needed to feel useful and capable after everything that had happened. All right, but we will take it slow. Over the next few days, they fell into an easy routine. Joshua would wake before dawn to tend the animals and do the heavier work, while Delilah recovered her strength. She took over the cooking, which was a blessing because Joshua's skills in that area were minimal at best, and she cleaned and organized the cabin in ways he had never bothered with. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Joshua learned that Delilah had been a teacher in Philadelphia before her father's business failed. She was educated and well-read, could quote poetry and discuss philosophy with an ease that left him feeling ignorant and awed in equal measure. But she never made him feel small for his simple education. Instead, she seemed genuinely interested in his stories about building the cabin, about the harsh winter he had survived his first year, about the satisfaction of watching his herd slowly grow. Delilah, for her part, seemed to bloom a little more each day. The color returned to her cheeks, and the haunted look began to fade from her eyes. She laughed more, and when she did, it was like sunshine breaking through clouds. It was on the 5th day that Joshua realized he was falling in love with her. They had ridden out to check on the cattle in the far pasture, and Delilah had dismounted to pick wildflowers growing along the creek bank. She was wearing one of the old shirts and a pair of pants Joshua had modified for her since her dress was beyond repair, and her hair was tied back with a strip of leather. She should have looked ridiculous, but instead, she looked like she belonged there, like she had always been part of his world. "Joshua, look at these," she called, holding up a handful of purple flowers. "What are they called?" "Prairie clover," he said, walking over to her. "They bloom in July and August. They are beautiful." She held them up to her nose and inhaled. "Everything is so different here from the city. So much space and light and life. I think I could be happy here." The words seemed to surprise her as much as they did him, and she quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing. "I mean, I can understand why you chose this place. It has a kind of simple beauty." "It is not an easy life," Joshua said carefully. "Winters are hard and you are pretty much on your own if anything goes wrong, but it is honest work and the land does not lie to you. Unlike people. Unlike some people." Delilah turned to face him fully, the flowers still clutched in her hand. "Joshua, I have been here almost a week now. We should probably talk about what happens next." Joshua's heart sank. He had known this conversation was coming, but he had been hoping to put it off a little longer. "What do you want to happen?" "I do not know. I have been thinking and I keep coming back to the same problem. I have no money, no way to get to another town safely, and even if I did, what would I do there? I do not have enough for passage back east, and even if I did, what would I be going back to? There is nothing left for me in Philadelphia. You could stay here." The words were out before Joshua could stop them, and he saw Delilah's eyes widen in surprise. "Joshua, I cannot just live here indefinitely. What would people think?" "There are no people to think anything. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and I go into Lead maybe once a month for supplies. No one needs to know you are here." "But that is no kind of life for me, hiding away like some kind of criminal. And it is not fair to you either. You deserve better than to have some woman you barely know imposing on your hospitality forever." "What if I do not see it as an imposition?" Joshua took a step closer to her. "Delilah, these past few days, having you here, it has been good. The cabin does not feel so empty anymore. I do not feel so alone. And I think maybe you feel the same way." Delilah's breath caught, and she clutched the flowers tighter. "Joshua, you cannot possibly mean what I think you mean. You do not know me. Not really. A week ago, you did not even know I existed. I know you are brave. I know you would rather die in a storm than sell yourself to a man like Vernon Pike. I know you work harder than any woman I have ever met, even with blistered hands and sore muscles. I know you make me laugh, and you are the first person in years to make this place feel like a home instead of just somewhere I sleep." He reached out and took her hand, the one not holding the flowers. "I know that sounds crazy. Maybe it is crazy, but I also know I do not want you to leave." Tears were streaming down Delilah's face now, but she was smiling. "You are crazy, but maybe I am too, because I do not want to leave either. But Joshua, we have to be practical. What are you suggesting? That I just stay here indefinitely as your hired hand?" "No." Joshua took a deep breath. "I am suggesting you stay as my wife." Delilah's mouth fell open. "Joshua, you cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious about anything in my life. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a few days. But out here, you learn to make decisions quickly. You cannot hesitate when a storm is coming or a cow is giving birth or your livelihood depends on the choices you make. And I am choosing this. I am choosing you if you will have me. But you deserve someone you love, not just some desperate woman who stumbled into your life by accident." "Who says I do not love you?" Joshua said quietly. "Maybe it is fast, maybe it is crazy, but I feel something for you, Delilah. Something real and strong and true, and I think maybe you feel it too." Delilah was crying in earnest now, but she was also nodding. "I do. God help me, I do." "But Joshua, what if you change your mind? What if you wake up in a month or a year and realize you made a terrible mistake?" "I will not." "How can you know that? How can anyone know anything? All we have is this moment and the choice we make right now. I am choosing you. Will you choose me?" For a long moment, Delilah just looked at him, tears still streaming down her face. Then she dropped the flowers and threw her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Joshua Wright." Joshua wrapped his arms around her waist and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around as she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, he kissed her forehead, her cheeks, and finally her lips, gently at first and then with more passion as she kissed him back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Delilah looked up at him with shining eyes. "So what do we do now? We cannot exactly get married without a preacher. We will ride into Lead tomorrow and find the circuit preacher. He comes through about once a month, and he was due about a week ago, so if we are lucky he will still be there. We will get married proper, legal and everything." "What if Vernon Pike sees me?" Joshua's jaw tightened. "Then I will deal with Vernon Pike. No one is taking you away from me, Delilah." "Not now, not ever." That night, Joshua slept by the fire as he had every night since Delilah arrived, but the cabin felt different now, charged with possibility and promise. Tomorrow they would ride into Lead and make their union official. Tomorrow they would start their life together. The thought filled Joshua with a joy so intense it almost hurt. But as it turned out, tomorrow brought something neither of them expected. They woke before dawn and dressed carefully. Delilah had managed to salvage and clean her dress as best she could, and while it would never be the fine garment it had once been, it was respectable enough. Joshua put on his best shirt and vest, the ones he usually reserved for the rare occasions he went to church in town. The ride to Lead took about an hour and a half, and with every mile, Joshua could feel Delilah growing more tense behind him on the horse. He had insisted she ride with him rather than take his old mule, both because it was faster and because he wanted her close where he could protect her if needed. Lead was bustling with activity, even at the early hour. The mining town had grown explosively over the past 3 years, and everywhere Joshua looked he saw new buildings going up, wagons rolling through the muddy streets, and men of every description milling about. It was a far cry from the peaceful solitude of his ranch. "Stay close to me," Joshua told Delilah as they dismounted outside the small church at the edge of town, "and keep your head down." They were in luck. The circuit preacher, a thin man named Reverend Thomas with kind eyes and a weary smile, was just preparing to leave for his next stop. When Joshua explained their situation, omitting the details about Vernon Pike, but making it clear they needed to be married quickly, the Reverend agreed without asking too many questions. "I have learned not to judge the Lord's timing," he said with a gentle smile. "If he has brought you two together, who am I to question the speed of it? Do you have witnesses?" That proved to be a small problem, but they found a solution in the form of Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who kept the church clean, and her husband who had been repairing a pew. Within half an hour, Joshua and Delilah stood before the altar in the small wooden church while Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony. Joshua had never been much for words, but when the time came to say his vows, he looked into Delilah's honey-colored eyes and spoke from the heart. "I promise to protect you, provide for you, and be faithful to you all my days. I promise to make you happy if it is in my power to do so. And I promise that you will never be alone or afraid again as long as I draw breath." Delilah's voice shook as she spoke her own vows. "I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes. I promise to be your partner in this life we are building together. And I promise to love you with everything I have, for as long as I live." When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife and told Joshua he could kiss his bride, Joshua did so with a tenderness that made Mrs. Henderson sigh happily. It was done. Delilah Norris was now Delilah Wright, and Joshua felt like his heart might burst with the rightness of it. They signed the marriage certificate, paid the Reverend with the little money Joshua had, and were just preparing to leave when the church door burst open. Vernon Pike stood in the doorway, flanked by two rough-looking men. He was a tall man, running to fat, with slicked back hair and cold eyes that swept the church before landing on Delilah. "Well, well," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "Miss Norris, I have been looking everywhere for you." Joshua stepped in front of Delilah, his hand instinctively going to the gun at his hip. "The lady is no longer Miss Norris. She is Mrs. Wright, as of 5 minutes ago, and she does not owe you anything." Pike's eyes narrowed as he looked Joshua up and down. "I do not believe I know you, friend. And I do not believe you understand the situation. Miss Norris owes me a considerable debt, one that her old landlady signed over to me. Debts do not disappear just because a woman gets married." "The debt was her father's, and he is dead," Delilah said, her voice steady despite the fear Joshua could feel thrumming through her body. "I never signed anything. I owe you nothing. The law might see it differently, and even if it does not, there are other laws out here, unwritten ones. I have invested time and money tracking you down, Miss Norris. I do not take kindly to people who run from their obligations." "She is not going anywhere with you," Joshua said firmly. "The lady is my wife now, which means any debt she might owe becomes my responsibility. Name your price and we will work out a payment plan." Pike laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, I do not think you can afford what she owes me, Cowboy, and besides, I do not want money. I want what I was promised." "Then you are going to be disappointed," Joshua said. "Because the only way you are taking my wife is over my dead body." The two men flanking Pike started to move forward, but Reverend Thomas stepped between them, his thin frame nonetheless commanding respect. "Gentlemen, you are in a house of God. Whatever grievances you have can be settled outside and preferably through the proper legal channels. Mr. Pike, I heard the young lady say she signed nothing. If that is true, then you have no legal claim on her, and I will testify to that if needed. Now, I suggest you leave before I summon the marshal." Pike's face reddened with anger, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten, at least temporarily. "This is not over," he said, pointing at Delilah. "I always collect what I am owed one way or another. You would do well to remember that, Mrs. Wright." He turned and stalked out of the church, his men following. Joshua did not relax until he heard the sound of horses riding away. "Thank you, Reverend," he said, his voice shaking slightly with the adrenaline coursing through him. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Reverend Thomas said firmly. "I have seen too many men like Vernon Pike destroy too many lives in towns like this. I will not stand by and let it happen again if I can prevent it, but you should be careful. Pike has influence in this town, and he does not forgive easily." "We will be careful," Joshua promised. "We will head back to my ranch and stay out of his way." But as they rode out of lead, Joshua could not shake the feeling that this was far from over. Pike was not the type of man to let go of something he considered his, and Joshua had no doubt he would try again. The question was when and how. That night, back at the ranch, Joshua barricaded the door and loaded his rifle, keeping it close at hand. Delilah was quiet, and he could see the worry etched on her face. "I am sorry," she said finally as they sat by the fire. "I have brought nothing but trouble into your life." "You have brought joy into my life," Joshua corrected gently. "Trouble comes and goes, but what we have, that is worth fighting for. What if he comes here? What if he tries to hurt you because of me? Then I will protect us both. Delilah, I told you before, I am not letting anyone take you from me. I meant that." She moved closer to him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his chest. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire and taking comfort in each other's presence. "Tell me about your life before," Delilah said softly. "About your parents, about Nebraska. I want to know everything about you." So Joshua told her. He told her about growing up on a small farm with parents who loved each other deeply and worked hard to provide for their only child. He told her about learning to ride before he could barely walk, about helping his father with the harvest, about his mother teaching him to read by lamplight on winter evenings. He told her about the fever that had taken them both within a week of each other, leaving him alone at 22 with a farm he had no heart to keep. "And then I came here," he finished. "I sold the farm, bought some cattle and supplies, and headed west. I wanted to start fresh, build something that was mine. I never expected to find someone to share it with." "Tell me about the woman," Delilah said, "the one who broke your heart." Joshua was surprised she had guessed, but he supposed it was not hard to figure out. "Her name was Sarah. We grew up together, planned to marry. But when my parents died and the farm was struggling, her father convinced her to marry someone else, someone with better prospects. I do not blame her for it. She made the practical choice. But it hurt you. It did. For a long time. But now, sitting here with you, I am grateful it happened. If Sarah had married me, I would never have come here. I never would have built this place, never would have become the man I am now, and I never would have met you." Delilah tilted her face up to his, and he kissed her softly. "I love you, Joshua Wright. I know it is fast and may be foolish, but I do. I love you." "I love you too, Delilah Wright." That night, Joshua gave Delilah the bed while he continued to sleep by the fire, though every instinct in him wanted to join her. But he was determined to be a gentleman, to let her come to him when she was ready. They were married, yes, but their relationship was still new, still fragile in some ways, and he did not want to rush her. But around midnight he woke to find Delilah standing beside him. "Joshua, are you awake?" "I am now." "What is wrong? Are you all right?" "I am fine. I just do not want to be alone tonight. May I stay with you?" Joshua shifted to make room for her by the fire, and she lay down beside him, her back pressed against his chest. He wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled the blanket over them both. "Is this all right?" he asked softly. "It is perfect," she murmured, already half asleep. "I feel safe with you." Joshua lay awake for a while longer, listening to her breathing slow and even out. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new worries. But tonight, he had everything he needed right here in his arms. The next 2 weeks passed in a kind of peaceful bliss. Joshua and Delilah settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked together during the day, tending the cattle, maintaining the property, and preparing for the coming winter. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk for hours, learning each other's stories, hopes, and dreams. Delilah proved to be a quick study when it came to ranch work. She learned to milk the cow, tend the chickens Joshua had bought from a neighbor, and even helped with the heavier tasks when needed. She was stronger than she looked, both physically and mentally, and Joshua found himself admiring her more each day. And slowly, carefully, they grew closer in other ways too. Their kisses became longer, more passionate. They began sharing the bed, though Joshua continued to be patient, letting Delilah set the pace. And then one night, 3 weeks after their wedding, Delilah turned to him in the darkness and whispered, "I am ready. If you want me, I am yours." "I have wanted you since the moment I saw you," Joshua admitted. "But I wanted to be sure you felt the same." "I do. I love you, Joshua, completely." "Show me." And so he did, gently and tenderly, making love to his wife for the first time while the fire crackled beside them and the wind whispered through the pines outside. It was awkward in places, as first times often are, but it was also beautiful and meaningful in a way that neither of them had expected. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the sheets, Delilah traced patterns on Joshua's chest with her finger. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For being patient with me, for giving me time, for making me feel cherished instead of used." Joshua kissed the top of her head. "You are my wife, Delilah. You are my partner, my equal, my love. I would never treat you as anything less. I know. That is why I love you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time since her father had died, Delilah slept without nightmares. But their peace was not to last. It was a month after their wedding when Joshua rode into Lead for supplies and heard troubling news. Vernon Pike had been asking questions about him, trying to find out where his ranch was located. Several people had told Pike to leave well enough alone, that Joshua Wright was not a man to mess with, but Pike had only smiled and said he was not worried. Joshua bought his supplies quickly and headed home, his mind racing. He needed to prepare for the possibility that Pike might come after them. He had been hoping the man would lose interest, but apparently that was not to be the case. When he got home and told Delilah what he had heard, her face went pale. "He is not going to give up, is he?" "It does not seem like it, but we are not helpless, Delilah. We can defend ourselves." "I do not know how to shoot a gun." "Then I will teach you." Over the next few days, Joshua gave Delilah shooting lessons, teaching her how to handle both the rifle and his spare revolver. She was a natural shot, steady-handed and focused, and within a week she could hit a target from 50 paces. "You are good at this," Joshua said admiringly after she knocked a can off the fence post on her first try. "I am scared," Delilah admitted, "and fear makes me focused. I will not let Pike take me, Joshua. I would rather die fighting." "It will not come to that. We are going to be smart about this. We are going to be prepared." They established a routine. Joshua made sure all the doors and windows were secured each night, and they kept the guns loaded and ready. They agreed on a system of signals, so if one of them saw riders approaching, they could alert the other quickly. It was another 2 weeks before Pike made his move. Joshua was out checking the fence line on the far edge of his property when he heard the distant sound of gunfire coming from the direction of the cabin. His heart dropped into his stomach, and he spurred his horse into a gallop, racing back across the fields. As he approached the cabin, he saw 3 horses tied up outside and could hear men's voices inside. Without thinking, Joshua burst through the door, his gun drawn. Inside, he found Vernon Pike and his 2 thugs. Delilah was backed into the corner, holding the rifle Joshua had taught her to shoot, her face pale but determined. One of Pike's men was clutching his arm, blood seeping through his fingers. "I warned her not to shoot," Pike said calmly when he saw Joshua. "But your little wife has more fight in her than I expected. Unfortunately, that just makes this more difficult for everyone." "Get out of my house," Joshua said, his voice deadly calm. "Get out now or I will put a bullet in you. Now, let us talk about this like reasonable men. I have a proposition for you, Mr. Wright. You give me what I am owed and I will leave you in peace. I will even pay you for your trouble. $500 cash money. That is more than you will make in a year with this little homestead." My wife is not for sale. Not for $500, not for $5,000. Now get out." Pike's pleasant expression finally cracked, revealing the cold anger beneath. "You are making a mistake, Cowboy. I own this territory. I own the law, I own the judges, I own the marshal. If I say your wife owes me money, then she owes me money, and I can make your life very difficult, or I can make it very easy. Your choice. I choose to tell you one more time to get out, and if you do not, I will make it so you cannot walk out." For a moment, the tension in the room was so thick Joshua could barely breathe. Then Pike nodded to his men. "Come on, we are leaving, but this is not over, Wright. Not by a long shot." As they filed out, Pike paused in the doorway. "You have 1 week to reconsider my generous offer. After that, things are going to get unpleasant." When they were gone, Joshua rushed to Delilah's side. She was shaking but unharmed. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "No. I heard them coming and got the rifle like you taught me. When they broke down the door, I warned them to leave. One of them laughed and started toward me, so I shot him in the arm. That is when you arrived." Joshua pulled her into his arms, his heart still racing. "You did exactly right. I am so proud of you." "Joshua, what are we going to do? He is not going to stop." "I know. Which means we need to be smarter than him. Tomorrow, we are going to ride to Deadwood and find a lawyer. If Pike wants to use the law against us, we will use it right back against him. We are going to prove that you do not owe him anything, and we are going to get a restraining order if such a thing exists out here. And if that does not work, we will figure out something else. But we are not giving up, Delilah. We are not letting him win." That night, neither of them slept much. They took turns keeping watch, and every sound outside made them jump. But dawn came without incident, and as soon as it was light, they saddled up and rode hard for Deadwood. Deadwood was even more lawless than Lead, a sprawling mining camp that had grown into a rough town practically overnight. But it was also bigger, which meant more options. Joshua and Delilah found a lawyer named Harrison Mills who had a small office above a general store. Mills listened to their story with a grave expression. When they were done, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "I will be honest with you, Mrs. Wright. Your situation is complicated. If you never signed anything acknowledging the debt, then technically you do not owe Mr. Pike anything. However, in places like this, the law is often less about what is technically true and more about who has the power to enforce their version of the truth." "So you are saying we are out of luck?" Joshua asked, his frustration evident. "Not at all. I am saying we need to be clever. I can draw up an affidavit stating that you never signed any debt agreement, and I can file it with the territorial court. That will create a legal record of your position. I can also send a letter to Mr. Pike, informing him that any further harassment will result in legal action. It might not stop him, but it will make him think twice, especially if he does have business interests he wants to protect. Men like Pike do not like official scrutiny." "How much will this cost?" Delilah asked. "For you, $25. And I will throw in the letter for free, because I have always wanted to tell Vernon Pike what I think of him in a professional capacity." It was more money than they could easily spare, but Joshua paid it without hesitation. Mills drew up the papers, had them both sign, and promised to file them immediately and send the letter to Pike by courier that very afternoon. As they rode back to the ranch, Delilah seemed lighter, more hopeful. "Do you think it will work?" "I think it gives us a fighting chance. Men like Pike are used to bullying people who have no recourse. Now we have recourse. We have the law on our side, even if it is a shaky version of the law. Thank you, Joshua, for fighting for me, for us. Always. That is what marriage is it not? Fighting for each other." When they got home, they found the ranch undisturbed, which was a relief. They spent the rest of the day working together, and for a few hours they were able to forget about Vernon Pike and his threats. But 3 days later, everything changed in a way neither of them could have predicted. It was early morning, just after dawn, when they heard horses approaching. Joshua grabbed his rifle and positioned himself by the window while Delilah stood ready with the revolver. But when the riders came into view, Joshua's tension eased slightly. It was not Pike's men. Instead, it was the territorial marshal, a grizzled man named Wade Carson, along with 2 deputies. Joshua stepped outside, his rifle lowered but still in his hands. "Marshal Carson, what brings you out this way?" Carson dismounted, his expression serious. "Mr. Wright, I am afraid I have some difficult news. Vernon Pike was found dead in his room at the saloon in Lead this morning. Shot once in the chest, and before he died, he told several witnesses that your wife was responsible." Joshua felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. "That is impossible. Delilah has been here with me. She has not left the ranch in 3 days. Can anyone corroborate that?" "I can corroborate it. We have been together every minute." "I am afraid a husband's testimony on behalf of his wife does not carry much weight, especially in a murder case. I am going to have to ask Mrs. Wright to come with me to answer some questions." "No." Joshua stepped between the marshal and the cabin. "You are not taking my wife anywhere based on the accusation of a dying man who had every reason to lie about her." "Mr. Wright, I do not want trouble, but I have a job to do. If your wife is innocent, then we will get this sorted out, but she needs to come answer questions." Delilah appeared in the doorway, her face pale but composed. "It is all right, Joshua, I will go. I have nothing to hide." "Delilah, no. If I run or refuse, it will only make me look guilty. I will go, answer their questions, and this will all be cleared up. Trust me." Joshua wanted to argue, wanted to physically prevent them from taking her, but he could see the determination in Delilah's eyes. She was right. Running would only make things worse. "Fine, but I am coming with her." "That is acceptable," Carson said. "But Mr. Wright, I need you to understand something. Vernon Pike was a powerful man with a lot of friends. They are going to want justice, and they are going to want it fast. The mood in Lead is ugly right now, so I suggest you both prepare yourselves for a difficult situation." The ride to Lead was one of the longest of Joshua's life. Delilah rode beside him, her hands tied loosely in front of her at the marshal's insistence, though Carson had at least allowed her to ride her own horse rather than being transported like a criminal. When they arrived in Lead, Joshua's worst fears were confirmed. A crowd had gathered outside the jail, and many of them were shouting angry words about justice and hanging. Joshua's blood ran cold. This was not going to be a fair investigation. This was going to be a lynching if they were not careful. Marshal Carson managed to get them inside the jail without incident, but the sound of the angry crowd outside was audible even through the thick walls. Carson led Delilah into a cell, though he did not lock it, and gestured for Joshua to sit in the main office. "All right, Mrs. Wright," Carson said, pulling up a chair. "Why do not you tell me where you were 2 nights ago between the hours of 9 and midnight?" "I was at our ranch with my husband. We had supper, cleaned up, and went to bed. We never left the property." "And you have been at the ranch continuously for the past 3 days?" "Yes. Joshua and I rode to Deadwood 3 days ago to see a lawyer, and we have been home ever since." "Why did you need to see a lawyer?" "Because Vernon Pike was harassing us. He claimed I owed him money and was threatening us. We went to see Harrison Mills to establish legal proof that I owed Pike nothing and to try to get him to leave us alone." Carson wrote everything down in a small notebook. "Did it work?" "We do not know. We never heard from Pike after that, and honestly, we were just hoping he had decided to leave us alone." "Mrs. Wright, I am going to be direct with you. Multiple witnesses say that Pike told them before he died that you shot him. They say he was very specific about it. Why would he lie about something like that when he was dying? Because he hated me. Because I refused to work for him. Because I married Joshua and escaped his control. He was an evil man, Marshall, and apparently he wanted to hurt me one last time before he died. Joshua could not stay quiet any longer. Marshall, this does not make any sense. How could Delilah have shot Pike in Lead when she was at the ranch with me? That is a 3-hour round trip on horseback. When exactly was Pike shot? Between 9 and midnight, according to the doctor. Then it is impossible. Delilah and I were together all evening. We went to bed around 8 and did not wake until dawn. There is no way she could have ridden to Leeds, shot Pike, and ridden back without me knowing. Unless you were in on it together. That is ridiculous. Why would we kill Pike? Yes, he was bothering us, but we had just filed legal paperwork against him. We were handling it through proper channels. We had no reason to kill him. Carson sighed and rubbed his face. Honestly, Mr. Wright, I am inclined to believe you. But the problem is that crowd outside. Pike's friends are demanding justice, and they do not care much about legal niceties. If I do not arrest someone, they are going to take matters into their own hands. And if I arrest your wife based on Pike's accusation, you are going to spend the next few weeks trying to prove her innocence while she sits in a cell, and there is no guarantee of a fair trial. So, what do you suggest? Joshua asked, his frustration boiling over. Because it sounds like we are damned either way. I suggest we find out who really killed Vernon Pike. If we can do that before the mob gets more worked up, then Mrs. Wright walks free and this whole mess goes away. And how do we do that? By asking questions. By finding out who else had a reason to want Pike dead. And I am willing to bet there are quite a few people in that category. Over the next several hours, Marshall Carson proved himself to be more than just a small-town lawman. He was methodical and smart, and he seemed genuinely committed to finding the truth rather than just placating the mob. He started by interviewing the witnesses who had heard Pike's dying accusation. It turned out there were only 3 of them, all men who worked for Pike in various capacities. And under Carson's questioning, their stories started to fall apart. One of them admitted he had not actually heard Pike say Delilah's name, just heard the others talking about it. Another contradicted the timeline, saying Pike had been shot around 8, not 9. Then Carson talked to the doctor who had examined Pike's body. The doctor confirmed that Pike had died from a single gunshot to the chest, but he also noted something interesting. The powder burns on Pike's clothes suggested the shot had been fired at close range, probably from across a table or desk. It was not the kind of shot someone would make breaking into a room or ambushing someone. This looks more like an argument gone wrong, the doctor said. Like 2 people sitting and talking, and then one pulls a gun. That does not sound like something Mrs. Wright would have done, Carson mused. She had no reason to be having a friendly conversation with Pike. Finally, Carson talked to the saloon owner, a shrewd woman named Margaret Hall who had run establishments in 3 different mining towns and missed nothing that went on under her roof. Pike had a meeting the night he died, she told Carson, with one of his business partners. Man named Eddie Sutton. They were in Pike's room for about an hour, and I could hear them arguing from downstairs. Sounded like Sutton thought Pike was cheating him out of money. And what time did Sutton leave? Around 9:30, I would say. He came down the stairs looking pale and shaken, did not even stop for his usual drink, just headed straight out the door. And when did you discover Pike's body? About an hour later. I went up to ask if he wanted supper, and I found him slumped over his desk, dead. I called for the doctor, and that is when Pike apparently said something about Mrs. Wright before he finally passed. Though between you and me, Marshal, I do not think he was in any condition to be making coherent accusations. The man was barely breathing. Carson thanked Mrs. Hall and immediately sent his deputies to find Eddie Sutton. It did not take long. Sutton was found trying to leave town on the next stage, and when questioned, he broke down almost immediately and confessed. Pike had been cheating him, skimming money from their joint gambling operation. Sutton had confronted him, they had argued, and Sutton had shot him in a moment of rage. But before Pike died, Sutton had panicked and tried to redirect the blame to Delilah, knowing that Pike had been publicly feuding with her and that she would make a convenient scapegoat. By late afternoon, the real story had come out, and Sutton was locked in the cell that had been waiting for Delilah. Carson personally escorted Joshua and Delilah out of the jail, past the now confused crowd, and saw them safely to their horses. "I apologize for the trouble, Mrs. Wright," Carson said sincerely. "You are free to go and there will be no charges against you. I will make sure everyone in town knows you were innocent." "Thank you, Marshal," Delilah said, her voice shaking with relief, "for believing in us and for finding the truth. It is my job, madam. Though I will say, this town is going to be better off without Vernon Pike. Man was a plague on this community. You all ride safe now." Joshua and Delilah rode out of lead as fast as they could without drawing attention. Neither of them spoke until they were well clear of town, and then Delilah finally broke down, the tears she had been holding back all day streaming down her face. Joshua immediately stopped and pulled her off her horse and into his arms. "It is all right. You are safe. It is over." "I was so scared," she sobbed into his chest. "I thought they were going to hang me. I thought I was never going to see you again. But you did not show it. You were so brave, Delilah, so strong. I have never been more proud of anyone in my life." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other on the side of the trail while their horses cropped grass nearby. Finally, Delilah pulled back and wiped her eyes. "Can we go home now? I just want to go home." "Yes, let us go home." That night, back at the ranch, they held each other close and gave thanks for their deliverance. The nightmare was finally over. Vernon Pike was dead, his hold on Delilah broken forever. They were free to live their lives without fear, without looking over their shoulders. The next morning brought one of those perfect August days that made the hardships of frontier life almost worthwhile. The sky was clear and blue. The air was warm but not too hot, and a gentle breeze rustled through the pines. Joshua woke to find Delilah already up, standing in the doorway of the cabin and looking out at the sunrise. "Could not sleep?" he asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I did not want to. I wanted to watch the sun come up and know that we get to see it together. That we are here, alive and free, and that no one can take that from us." Joshua kissed the top of her head. "We are going to have a good life, Delilah. I promise you that. I know. We already have a good life, and it is only going to get better." She was right. Over the next several months, as summer turned to fall and then to winter, Joshua and Delilah built their life together. They worked side by side to prepare for the cold months ahead, stocking up on food, wood, and supplies. When the first snow fell in October, they were ready. The winter of 1878 into 1879 was hard, as winters in the Black Hills always were, but Joshua and Delilah faced it together. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading from the few books Delilah had managed to save from her father's belongings, or just talking about their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the herd," Joshua said one night as they lay in bed, listening to the wind howl outside. "If we can build it up to 50 head, we could actually make a decent living, maybe even hire some help." "I want to plant a garden in the spring," Delilah said. "A big one with vegetables and flowers, And maybe we could get some chickens and pigs. Make this place feel more like a real farm. You want to be a farmer's wife. I want to be your wife. Whether that means being a rancher's wife or a farmer's wife or both, I just want to build a life with you." "What about children?" Joshua asked softly. "Do you want that?" Delilah turned to face him in the darkness. "Someday, when we are more established, when the ranch is more secure, I want to bring children into a stable home, not a place where we are still struggling to survive." "Does that sound selfish?" "No, it sounds wise. We have time. We have all the time in the world." But as it turned out, time had its own plans. In early February, Delilah started feeling sick in the mornings. At first they thought it was just something she ate, but when the sickness continued for a week and then 2 weeks, Delilah began to suspect the truth. "Joshua, I think I might be pregnant." Joshua's eyes went wide. "Are you sure?" "No, not completely, but all the signs are there. I am sick in the mornings, I am exhausted all the time, and I have missed my monthly courses." Joshua pulled her into his arms, a huge smile spreading across his face. "That is wonderful, is it not? I mean, I know we said we wanted to wait, but this is still wonderful, right?" "It is," Delilah said, though her voice was uncertain. "I am just scared. We are still so isolated here, and what if something goes wrong? What if I need a doctor?" "Then we will get you to a doctor. I will ride to Lead or Deadwood or wherever we need to go. Delilah, we are going to be all right. We are going to be better than all right. We are going to be a family." As winter gradually gave way to spring, Delilah's pregnancy became more obvious. Her belly began to swell, and she started to feel the baby move inside her. Joshua was beside himself with excitement, constantly fussing over her and trying to do all the heavy work so she would not strain herself. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Delilah would protest, but she was secretly touched by his devotion. In May, when Delilah was about 6 months along, Joshua rode into Lead and came back with a midwife named Mrs. Paulson, a competent German woman who had delivered dozens of babies in mining camps across the territory. "You are healthy, the baby is healthy, everything looks good, Mrs. Paulson pronounced after examining Delilah. "But you should not be alone when your time comes. Send your husband for me when the pains start, and I will come as fast as I can. And if I cannot come for some reason, he should take you to my house in Lead. Do not try to do this alone." "We will not," Joshua promised. "Thank you, Mrs. Paulson." The summer of 1879 was one of the happiest times of Joshua's life. The ranch was thriving, with calves being born and the herd growing. The garden Delilah had planted was flourishing, providing them with fresh vegetables. And every day they could see and feel their baby growing, preparing to join them in the world. It was in late August, almost exactly a year after the storm that had brought Delilah into his life, when Delilah woke Joshua in the middle of the night. "Joshua, it is time. The baby is coming." Joshua was out of bed in an instant, his heart racing. "Are you sure? How far apart are the pains?" "About 10 minutes. We have time, but you need to go get Mrs. Paulson." Joshua threw on his clothes, already mentally calculating the ride to Lead. It would take him an hour and a half to get there, maybe 2 hours to get back with Mrs. Paulson if she came immediately. That meant Delilah would be alone for at least 3 hours, possibly more. "I do not want to leave you," he said, torn between his need to get help and his instinct to stay with his wife. "You have to. I will be fine. Just go quickly and come back to me." Joshua kissed her fiercely, then ran out to saddle his horse. The ride to Lead was the longest of his life, even though he pushed his horse as fast as he dared in the darkness. When he finally reached Mrs. Paulson's house and pounded on her door, she emerged already half-dressed, her medical bag in hand. "The baby is coming." "Yes, the pain started about 3 hours ago now. We need to hurry." Mrs. Paulson hitched up her wagon, loaded her supplies, and they set off back to the ranch. Dawn was just breaking as they arrived, and Joshua could hear Delilah crying out from inside the cabin. He ran in to find her on the bed, her face flushed and sweaty, her hands gripping the sheets. "I am here," he said, taking her hand. "Mrs. Paulson is here. Everything is going to be all right." Mrs. Paulson immediately took charge, sending Joshua to heat water and gather clean cloths while she examined Delilah. "The baby is coming fast," she announced. "This is good, means less time laboring. But you need to be strong now, Mrs. Wright. When I tell you to push, you push with everything you have." The next 2 hours were the most intense of Delilah's life. The pain was overwhelming, worse than anything she had ever imagined, but she held onto Joshua's hand and followed Mrs. Paulson's instructions. And finally, just as the sun cleared the horizon, filling the cabin with golden light, a baby's cry pierced the air. "It is a boy," Mrs. Paulson announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A big, healthy boy." She cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a blanket before placing him in Delilah's arms. Delilah looked down at her son, tears streaming down her face, and felt a love so powerful it took her breath away. "Joshua, look at him. Look at our son." Joshua knelt beside the bed, staring in wonder at the tiny person they had created. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was red-faced from crying, but to Joshua, he was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "What should we name him?" Delilah asked softly. Joshua thought for a moment. "My father's name was Thomas. What was your father's name, Daniel?" "What about Thomas Daniel, Wright? We can call him Tommy." "I love it. Hello, Tommy," Delilah whispered to the baby. "Welcome to the world, little one. You are so loved." Mrs. Paulson stayed for the rest of the day, making sure both Delilah and the baby were doing well. By evening, she pronounced them both healthy and headed back to lead, promising to check on them in a week. That night, Joshua lay beside Delilah in bed, their son sleeping between them in a cradle Joshua had made from wood scraps over the past few months. They were both exhausted but too happy to sleep, marveling at the miracle they had witnessed. "I cannot believe he is really here," Delilah said softly, stroking the baby's tiny hand. "After everything we have been through, all the fear and the danger, and now we have this perfect little person." "You were so brave today," Joshua said. "I was terrified something would go wrong, but you were incredible. I had you with me. That made all the difference." Joshua leaned over to kiss her gently. "I love you, Delilah Wright, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. I love you too, and I love our son. And I love this life we have built together. We are a family now, a real family. We were always a real family. From the moment you took me in during that storm, from the moment you offered me shelter and safety and love, we were a family. This little one just makes it official." As summer turned to fall and then to winter again, the Wright family settled into their new normal. Tommy was a good baby, healthy and happy, and he brought a joy to the ranch that neither Joshua nor Delilah had anticipated. Even the hard work of caring for an infant seemed manageable when they were doing it together. Joshua proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to help with the baby, singing silly songs to make Tommy smile, and spending hours just watching his son sleep. Delilah had never seen this side of him before, and it made her love him even more. The years began to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new blessings. In 1880, Delilah became pregnant again, and in the spring of 1881 she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Emily, after both their mothers. 2 years after that came another son, James, and then 3 years later, a second daughter, Catherine. The ranch grew along with their family. Joshua expanded the herd to over 100 head of cattle, and built a larger house to accommodate their growing brood. He hired a couple of hands to help with the work, young men from town who were happy to have steady employment. Delilah's garden became famous in the area, and she started selling vegetables and preserves to neighbors and even to some of the stores in Lead. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, illness and injury, times when money was tight and the future uncertain. But Joshua and Delilah faced every challenge together, their love for each other and their children giving them strength. In 1885, 7 years after that fateful storm, Joshua and Delilah stood on the porch of their home, watching their 4 children play in the yard. Tommy was now 6 years old, tall and sturdy like his father. Rose was 4, with her mother's honey-colored eyes and a gentle disposition. James was 2 and into everything, and baby Catherine was just learning to walk. "Can you believe this is our life?" Delilah asked, leaning against Joshua's shoulder. "Sometimes I still have to pinch myself to make sure it is real." "I know what you mean. When I think back to that night I found you in the storm, I never could have imagined all of this. I was just a lonely cowboy trying to make a life for himself. And now look at us. You ever regret it? Taking me in, marrying me so quickly, tying yourself to someone you barely knew." Joshua turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Not for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Delilah. You and these children, this life we have built. It is more than I ever dreamed of having." "Good, because I feel the same way. You saved my life that night, Joshua, in more ways than one. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love, and I will never stop being grateful for that." "You do not have to be grateful. You have earned your place here 100 times over. This ranch, this family, it is as much yours as it is mine. More even. You are the heart of it all." Delilah kissed him softly. "We are the heart of it, together." As the sun set over the black hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Joshua and Delilah called their children in for supper. Inside the house they had built with their own hands, they gathered around the table for the evening meal, a family united by love and strengthened by everything they had overcome together. Tommy said grace, his young voice clear and confident. "Thank you, God, for this food and for our family. Thank you for keeping us safe and together. Amen." "Amen," they all echoed. As they ate and talked and laughed together, Joshua looked around the table at his wife and children and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what life was supposed to be. Not perfect, not always easy, but real and honest and full of love. After the children were in bed, Joshua and Delilah sat by the fire as they did most evenings, enjoying the quiet after the chaos of the day. Delilah was mending one of Tommy's shirts while Joshua whittled a new toy horse for James. "Do you remember what you said to me that first morning?" Delilah asked suddenly. "After you found me in the storm," Joshua thought back, "I said a lot of things. You said you had got me, that I was safe, and you were right. I was safe from that moment forward because of you." "Because of us," Joshua corrected. "You made yourself safe, Delilah. You fought for yourself, you learned to shoot, you stood up to Pike and everyone else who tried to hurt you. I was just there to help. You were there to love me, and that made all the difference." Joshua set down his whittling and pulled Delilah close. "I will always be here to love you, until the day I die and beyond." "That is a long time. Not nearly long enough." They sat like that for a while, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, but inside, all was warm and safe and peaceful. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and more blessings. The children grew up strong and healthy, each one developing their own personality and dreams. Tommy inherited his father's love of the land and took to ranching like he was born to it. Rose became an avid reader like her mother and eventually became a teacher in lead. James developed a talent for working with horses and started a breeding program that became well known throughout the territory. And little Catherine grew into a spirited, independent young woman who eventually became a midwife like Mrs. Paulson, helping bring new life into the world. In 1889, when Tommy turned 10, Joshua began teaching him how to run the ranch, passing on all the knowledge and skills he had accumulated over the years. It was important to Joshua that his children understood the value of hard work and the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. "Why do we work so hard, Pa?" Tommy asked one day as they were mending fence in the hot August sun. "Would it not be easier to just sell the ranch and move to town?" Joshua stopped what he was doing and looked at his son seriously. "We work hard because this land is ours, Tommy. We have earned it with sweat and determination. And more importantly, this ranch is not just a place. It is a legacy. It is something I can pass on to you and your brother and sisters, something that will last long after I am gone. That is worth working hard for." "I understand, Pa. And I promise I will take good care of it when it is my turn." Joshua ruffled his son's hair affectionately. "I know you will." In 1890, South Dakota became a state, and the wild frontier days began to fade into memory. Lead continued to grow and prosper, becoming less of a rough mining camp and more of an established town. Joshua and Delilah watched these changes with mixed feelings. They were glad to see civilization spreading and lawlessness decreasing, but they also mourned the passing of the untamed wilderness that had first drawn Joshua to the Black Hills. But through all the changes, their love remained constant. Every morning, Joshua would wake up and look at Delilah sleeping beside him, and he would feel the same surge of love and gratitude he had felt on their wedding day. And every evening, Delilah would watch Joshua come in from working the ranch, and her heart would swell with affection for this good, steady man who had given her everything. In the summer of 1895, 17 years after that fateful storm, Joshua and Delilah celebrated their anniversary by taking a rare trip away from the ranch. They left the children in Tommy's capable hands and rode up into the hills to the spot where they had first talked about their future together, where Delilah had picked wildflowers and Joshua had asked her to stay. "You remember standing here?" Joshua asked, taking Delilah's hand. "You had just picked a bunch of purple flowers, prairie clover, and you told me you thought you could be happy here. I remember. I was so scared to hope for anything good, but I could not help myself. There was something about you, about this place, that made me want to believe in possibility again. And are you happy? After all these years?" Delilah turned to face him, her eyes shining with tears. "Joshua Wright, I am happier than I ever imagined I could be. You have given me a beautiful life, 4 wonderful children, and a love that sustains me every single day. How could I be anything but happy? Good. Because I intend to keep making you happy for many more years to come. I am counting on it." They stood there for a long time, hand in hand, looking out at the land they had worked so hard to tame and build upon. From this vantage point, they could see their ranch spread out below them, the house and outbuildings they had constructed, the pastures where their cattle grazed, the garden where Delilah grew her vegetables and flowers. It was a testament to their hard work, their determination, and their love. "We did all right, did we not?" Joshua said softly. "We did better than all right. We built something real and lasting. We created a family and a home. We survived and thrived. I would say we did more than all right." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in those familiar shades of gold and pink, Joshua and Delilah rode back down to their ranch, back to their children and their life together. And as they rode, they talked about the future, about watching their children grow and have families of their own, about the possibility of grandchildren someday, about growing old together on the land they loved, true to form. Life continued to bring both challenges and joys. In 1897, there was a terrible drought that tested every rancher in the region. Joshua and Delilah had to make hard decisions about their herd, selling off some cattle to ensure the rest would survive. But they weathered the crisis, just as they had weathered every other challenge, by relying on each other and refusing to give up. In 1899, Tommy married a local girl named Sarah Mitchell, and the following year, he and Sarah gave Joshua and Delilah their first grandchild, a boy they named Joshua after his grandfather. The sight of his grandson made Joshua realize how much time had passed, but it also filled him with pride and joy. The legacy he had hoped to build was being realized. As the new century dawned, bringing with it new technologies and new ways of thinking, Joshua and Delilah found themselves becoming the elder generation. Tommy had taken over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, with James helping, while Rose had her own family in lead and Catherine was building a thriving midwifery practice. But Joshua and Delilah were far from done. They still worked on the ranch every day, still tended the garden, still sat by the fire in the evenings and talked about their dreams and plans. Their love, far from fading with time, had only grown deeper and stronger, tempered by years of partnership and shared experience. One evening in the fall of 1903, 25 years after the storm that had brought them together, Joshua and Delilah sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were in their late 40s now, with gray threading through their hair and lines of age and laughter marking their faces. But to each other they were as beautiful as they had been on that first day. "You know what tomorrow is?" Delilah asked. "Of course I do. It is the anniversary of the day I found you in the storm. August 17th, 1878. How could I forget the day that changed my life?" 25 years, a quarter of a century, it hardly seems possible. Yet here we are, still standing, still together, still in love, Delilah agreed. "More now than ever, I think. When we were young and first married, our love was passionate and exciting, but it was also uncertain. We did not know if it would last. Now, after all these years, after everything we have been through together, I know our love will last forever. That gives me a peace I never had before." Joshua reached for her hand and brought it to his lips. "You are my forever, Delilah Wright. You always have been, from the moment I saw you stumbling through that storm. Some part of me knew even then that you were meant to be mine. And you were meant to be mine. My rescuer, my partner, my love." They sat together as darkness fell, watching the stars come out one by one over the black hills. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family, Tommy and Sarah's voices, the laughter of their grandchildren who were visiting. It was a symphony of love and life, and Joshua and Delilah were at the center of it all. The next day, the whole family gathered for a celebration of Joshua and Delilah's 25 years together. Rose came from Lead with her husband and 3 children. James arrived with his new wife, whom he had married just that spring. Catherine came with her medical bag as always, ready to help if anyone needed her. And Tommy and Sarah were there, of course, with their 3 children, including young Joshua, who was now 3 years old and into everything. They had a feast, with everyone contributing dishes. There was beef from the ranch, vegetables from Delilah's garden, bread Sarah had baked, and a cake Rose had made specially for the occasion. They ate and laughed and told stories, celebrating not just 25 years of marriage but 25 years of family, of love, of building a life together in this wild and beautiful place. At one point, Tommy stood up to make a toast. "Ma, Pa, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for showing us what real love looks like. Thank you for building this ranch and this family with your own hands and your own hearts. Thank you for teaching us that hard work and honesty and devotion are the things that matter most. We love you both, and we are so proud to be your children." There was not a dry eye at the table as everyone raised their glasses to Joshua and Delilah. And as they sat there surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by the family they had created and the legacy they were building, Joshua and Delilah looked at each other and knew that every hardship, every challenge, every moment of fear and uncertainty had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment. As the years continued to pass, Joshua and Delilah gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, though they never stopped contributing completely. They were always there to offer advice, to help with the grandchildren, to tend the garden, to maintain the traditions they had established over decades of living on this land. They watched with pride as Tommy expanded the ranch, buying adjacent properties and building the herd to over 500 head. They cheered as Rose's oldest son became a lawyer in Rapid City, the first in the family to pursue a profession requiring formal education. They celebrated as James won prizes at regional fairs for his horses. And they marveled as Catherine delivered dozens of babies in Lead and the surrounding area, helping to bring new life into the world just as Mrs. Paulson had done for them so many years ago. But through it all, the constant was their love for each other. No matter how busy life became, no matter how many demands were placed on their time and energy, Joshua and Delilah always made time for each other. They still took walks together in the hills. They still sat by the fire in the evenings and talked. They still held hands and kissed and looked at each other like they were the only two people in the world. "How do you do it?" Rose asked her mother one day as they were working together in the garden. "How do you and Pa still act like newlyweds after all these years?" Delilah thought about it for a moment. "I think it is because we never take each other for granted. We remember how we started, how scared and uncertain we both were. We remember the struggles we faced and the obstacles we overcame. And we make a choice every single day to love each other, to be kind to each other, to put each other first. Love is not just a feeling, Rose. It is a decision you make over and over again." "That is beautiful, Ma. It is true. Your father and I have had our disagreements over the years, our moments of frustration and anger, but we always come back to that decision to love each other, and that has made all the difference." In 1910, when Joshua turned 58 and Delilah was 54, they made a decision that surprised everyone. They announced they were taking a trip back east to Philadelphia, so Delilah could see where she had grown up and maybe find closure for the life she had left behind all those years ago. "Are you sure about this?" Tommy asked his mother. "It has been over 30 years since you left." "Everything will be different, I know. But I think I need to go back just once, to see where I came from, to remember my father, to close that chapter of my life once and for all, and I want your father with me." "Of course I am going with you," Joshua said firmly. "We do this together, like we do everything else." The trip east was long and tiring, but also exciting. They took the train from Rapid City, a journey that would have been unthinkable when they first arrived in Dakota Territory, but which was now routine. As they traveled across the country, watching the landscape change from the wild hills of South Dakota to the endless plains of Nebraska, to the farmlands of Iowa and Illinois, and finally to the bustling cities of the East, Joshua and Delilah marveled at how much the world had changed in their lifetimes. Philadelphia was both familiar and alien to Delilah. The streets she had walked as a girl were still there, but they were busier, more crowded, more industrial than she remembered. The boarding house where she had lived with her father before his death was now a factory. The church where her father's funeral had been held was still standing, and Delilah spent a long afternoon there, praying and remembering. "You regret leaving?" Joshua asked as they walked through the city. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had stayed?" "No," Delilah said firmly. "This place, these memories, they are part of who I was, but they are not who I am. Who I am is a woman who was brave enough to run, who was lucky enough to find love in the most unexpected place, who built a life and a family in the wild hills of South Dakota. I do not regret anything, Joshua, not one single thing." They spent a week in Philadelphia, visiting museums and theaters, eating in restaurants, experiencing all the things the big city had to offer. But by the end of the week, they were both homesick for the open spaces and fresh air of the Black Hills. "Ready to go home?" Joshua asked. "More than ready. I have seen what I needed to see. Now I just want to go back to our ranch, our family, our life." The journey home felt faster somehow, maybe because they knew what they were traveling toward. And when they finally arrived back at the ranch in early September and saw their children and grandchildren waiting to welcome them home, Joshua and Delilah both felt a surge of love and gratitude so powerful it brought tears to their eyes. "Home," Delilah whispered, looking around at the familiar landscape, the house they had built, the family they had created. "We are home." The years that followed were peaceful and productive. Joshua and Delilah fully retired from active ranch work, content to let the younger generation take over while they enjoyed their grandchildren and pursued interests they had never had time for before. Joshua took up woodworking, creating beautiful furniture and toys. Delilah finally had time to read all the books she had always wanted to read, and she started writing letters to her children and grandchildren, recording the history of their family so future generations would know where they came from. In 1920, 42 years after that fateful storm, Joshua and Delilah celebrated their anniversary surrounded by 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. The ranch was thriving under Tommy's management, and the Wright name was respected throughout the region. They had built something real and lasting, just as they had always dreamed. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Joshua and Delilah sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were old now, Joshua nearly 70 and Delilah 64, with bodies that ached and moved slowly. But their love was as strong as ever, maybe stronger because it had survived and thrived for more than 4 decades. 42 years, Joshua said, shaking his head in wonder. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that I found you in that storm. Other times it feels like we have always been together, like there was never a time when you were not part of my life. I know what you mean. When I try to remember my life before you, before this place, it all seems so distant and unreal, like it happened to someone else. My real life, my true life, started the night you opened your door and brought me inside. Best decision I ever made. Best thing that ever happened to me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching the stars. Then Delilah said softly, "Joshua, promise me something, anything. Promise me that when we die, whenever that may be, we will be buried together on this land, right here on the ranch we built. I do not want to be anywhere else for eternity except by your side." Joshua's eyes filled with tears. "I promise, right here on this land together forever. There is nowhere else I would rather be." They kissed gently, and then they went inside to bed, where they fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done for more than 15,000 nights, as comfortable and content as if they had been doing it for 1,000,000 nights. The following years brought both joy and sorrow, as old age inevitably does. In 1922, they lost Tommy's wife Sarah to pneumonia, a blow that devastated the family. But they rallied around Tommy and his children, providing support and love through the grief. In 1924, they celebrated the marriage of their youngest grandchild. In 1926, they welcomed their 10th great-grandchild. Through it all, Joshua and Delilah remained devoted to each other and to the family they had created. They were the patriarch and matriarch now, the foundation upon which 4 generations had been built. And they took that responsibility seriously, always available with advice, always ready with a hug or a word of encouragement, always demonstrating through their own relationship what true love looked like. In the summer of 1928, when Joshua was 76 and Delilah was 70, they took one last ride up into the hills together. It was harder now, their bodies not as strong as they once were, but they were determined. They rode to the spot where Joshua had proposed all those years ago, where Delilah had picked wildflowers and they had talked about their future. "Look," Delilah said, pointing, "prairie clover, just like that day." Joshua dismounted carefully and picked a handful of the purple flowers, then brought them to Delilah. "For you, just like always." Delilah pressed the flowers to her face and inhaled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I love you, Joshua Wright. I have loved you for 50 years, and I will love you forever. And I love you, Delilah Wright. You are my heart, my life, my everything. You always have been, and you always will be." They stood together in the sunshine, 2 old people who had lived an extraordinary life together. And they knew that whatever time they had left, whether it was days or months or years, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. As it turned out, they had a bit more time. Joshua lived to be 80 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep in early 1932 with Delilah by his side. His last words were, "I love you," spoken to the woman who had been his partner for more than half a century. Delilah mourned him deeply, but she was not lost without him. She had their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. She had the ranch they had built together and the legacy they had created. And she had the memories of 54 years of love, devotion, and partnership. She lived another 6 years, remaining sharp and active until the end. She spent her final years telling stories to her great-grandchildren about their great-grandfather, making sure they knew what kind of man he was and how much he had loved them all. She tended her garden until the very end, taking pride in keeping beautiful the land she and Joshua had worked so hard to cultivate. Delilah passed away in the spring of 1938 at the age of 80, surrounded by her family. Her last words, like Joshua's, were, "I love you," spoken to the man who had given her everything and who she would soon be joining. They buried her next to Joshua on a small hill overlooking the ranch, just as they had both requested. Over the years, the Wright Ranch became something of a legend in South Dakota, a symbol of what was possible when 2 people loved each other enough to work hard and never give up. But the real legacy of Joshua and Delilah Wright was not the land or the cattle or the house they had built. It was the love they had shared and the example they had set for their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They had shown, through 54 years of marriage, that true love was not just about passion or romance, though they had plenty of both. It was about partnership and commitment, about choosing each other every single day, about building something real and lasting together. And on quiet summer evenings, When the sun sets over the Black Hills and the wind whispers through the pines, if you stand on that small hill where Joshua and Delilah are buried, you can almost feel their presence. You can almost sense their love, still alive and vibrant after all these years, a testament to the power of two souls who found each other in the midst of a storm and chose to build a life together. The storm that brought Delilah to Joshua's door in August of 1878 had been violent and terrifying, but it had also been the beginning of something beautiful. It had brought together two lonely souls who needed each other more than they knew. And from that one night of terror and rescue had grown a love story for the ages, a romance that had lasted more than half a century and created a legacy that would endure for generations. That was the true miracle. Not that Joshua had sheltered a lost woman during a storm, but that the dawn after that storm had brought an impossible truth. That sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, in the most unlikely circumstances, two people can find in each other everything they have ever needed. That love, real and true and lasting, can grow from the smallest seeds. And that a single act of kindness, one decision to help a stranger in need, can change the course of not just two lives but of generations to come. Joshua and Delilah Wright had built more than a ranch in the Black Hills of South Dakota. They had built a love story that would be told and retold in their family for 100 years and more. They had proved that love, when it is genuine and committed and true, can survive anything. And they had left behind a legacy that said, more clearly than any words ever could, that the greatest adventure in life is not conquering new frontiers or striking it rich or achieving fame and glory. The greatest adventure is simply this: finding someone to love and building a life together that matters. That was the lesson of Joshua and Delilah Wright. That was their gift to the world. And that was why, long after they were both gone, people still told their story. The story of the lonesome cowboy who sheltered a lost woman during a storm, and how the dawn brought the impossible truth that they had found in each other. Everything they had ever dreamed of, and more than they had ever dared to hope for.